They stopped watching you. You noticed it somewhere around the time the birthday cards got fewer. The promotions went to someone with a fresher face. And the table stopped going quiet when you walked in. You noticed it. And here's what I find exquisitely funny: you decided that was a problem. You started adjusting. Trimming? Shrinking yourself down to fit a space that was never designed for who you actually are anymore. You started performing urgency, relevance, youth for an audience that had already walked out of the theater. Let me ask you something. When a lion sits very still in tall grass, when it has stopped announcing itself, stopped making noise, stopped explaining what it is to the gazelles grazing nearby, do you think that lion is losing? Do you think the quiet is weakness? No. Of course not. You know what the quiet is, but you forgot that you're the lion. Somewhere between 40 and now, someone convinced you that invisibility was failure. That being overlooked was the same as being irrelevant. That the room not noticing you when you walked in meant something had gone wrong with you. Nothing went wrong. Something went right. Something finally, quietly, brilliantly right. And you've been so busy apologizing for it that you haven't stopped to recognize what it is. The world just handed you the rarest weapon a person can carry. A weapon so subtle that most people never realize they're holding it. And you've been trying to give it back. I'm going to show you what it is. And then, this is the part that's going to sting slightly. I'm going to show you how long you've been using it against yourself. It started earlier than 40. Let's be precise about this. It started the first time you did something genuinely remarkable, and the room didn't react the way you expected. Maybe you were 12. Maybe 22. Maybe 35. The exact age doesn't matter. What matters is the conclusion you drew from the silence. The conclusion was, not enough. You were not enough. And so, methodically, with the diligence of someone who actually cares about doing things correctly, you began optimizing. You optimized your presentation. You learned to enter rooms louder, to speak with more certainty than you felt, to dress for the version of yourself that other people found easiest to digest. You studied what got attention. You practiced giving people exactly the signal they were looking for, because the alternative, the real you, operating on your own frequency, seemed to produce confusion, indifference, sometimes mild irritation. And it worked. For a while it worked. But then you turned 40, or 42, or 47. And the optimization started failing. The room that used to respond to your signal began recalibrating. The younger voices were louder. The energy you had to spend projecting relevance went up, and the return on that energy went down. And somewhere in that gap, a very specific thought appeared. You know the one. It sounds like this. Maybe I've already peaked. Maybe this is what irrelevance feels like. Maybe it's time to get smaller, quieter, less. You didn't say it out loud, of course. You're too controlled for that. But it was there. A low-frequency hum under everything, vibrating behind every meeting you didn't speak up in. Every idea you filed away because you thought no one would take it seriously coming from you. Why? Every social gathering where you defaulted to listening rather than leading. And here's the thing. Here's where I find genuine amusement in your situation. The people around you interpreted all of this as maturity. They called your silence wisdom. They called your restrained composure. They looked at you getting smaller and called it grace. They were wrong, but not in the direction you think. They were wrong because what they were watching wasn't wisdom or composure or grace. It was grief. You were grieving a version of yourself that was never actually yours to begin with. You were grieving a performance. And the performance, the loud, optimized, strategically visible version of you, was never the real weapon. It was the distraction. I once knew a man very put together, very committed to the idea that presence could be manufactured, who convinced himself that the problem with getting older was the loss of surface. He kept polishing the surface, re-lacquering it, building it higher, brighter. He never once considered that the surface was the thing in his way. I found that touching. And the way you find a man polishing his chains touching, the real weapon was always underneath. And underneath is exactly where people stop looking after 40. That's not a tragedy. Let me say that again, because you're going to want to hear it as a consolation. And I am not offering one. That is not a tragedy. That is a structural advantage so significant that if most people understood it fully, they would stop everything they were doing and rebuild from the ground up. But most people never understand it fully, because understanding it requires admitting something uncomfortable. It requires admitting that the visibility you've been chasing, the recognition, the room going quiet, the external confirmation that you matter, is the cage, and the cage was never locked. You just never tried the door. So here's the actual question. Not, why doesn't the world see you anymore? That's the wrong question, and you know it. The real question, the one you've been very carefully avoiding, is this. What would you do if you completely stopped caring whether it did? Let's start with the word itself. Underestimate it. Sit with it for a moment. Really list. And to what it says. It says, someone else estimated you. Someone else ran the numbers on what you are, decided on a figure, wrote it down, and got it wrong. The word carries within it the assumption that an external authority performed an assessment, and the whole tragedy of your situation, the part you've been suffering over, is that you've been accepting that assessment as if it were accurate, as if the people who stopped watching you had any idea what they were looking at in the first place. They didn't. Underestimated is not owned. It is a positional advantage. It is what happens when your opponents have written you off the board, turned their attention elsewhere, and left you to move freely. In chess, forgive the pedestrian metaphor, but it fits. The most dangerous piece is the one your opponent forgot to track. The queen isn't threatening from the center of the board, she's threatening from the corner you stopped watching. You are not undervalued, you are under-tracked. And there is a significant difference between a thing that has been wrongly priced and a thing that is moving through your defenses right now, unseen. The label irrelevant, which is the label you've actually been applying to yourself, let's be honest, is a word that belongs to systems, organizations, institutions, youth, obsessed cultural machinery that runs on novelty and discards anything that doesn't spike a metric. The label was never about you. It was about the system's inability to process anything that doesn't fit its current template. And here's the clarifying thought you've been denying. Yourself, a system that cannot process you is not an authority on your value. On your value. It is simply a system with limited range. The label, underestimated, is not the diagnosis. It is the diagnosis of everyone else's vision problem? Where does this feeling actually come from? Let's trace it properly. Because society told me I peak at 35 is too easy an answer. And easy answers are for people who don't want to arrive anywhere useful. The feeling comes from a very specific substitution error you made early in life. You substituted visibility for evidence. You decided, reasonably given the environment, that if people saw you and responded, that was proof of value. And if they stopped seeing you and responding, that was evidence of its absence. The external signal became the internal confirmation. This is understandable. It is also completely wrong, and I mean that clinically rather than critically. The problem isn't that you wanted to matter to people. That's not a flaw. The problem is that you built a measurement system with the wrong instrument. You measured your worth with other people's attention, which is like measuring temperature with a barometer. The instrument responds to something real. There is a relationship between pressure and temperature, but it is measuring the wrong thing, and it will mislead you consistently. After 40, the attention barometer drops. Not because the temperature changed, but because the pressure system around you, the cultural weather, the institutional priorities, the social energies of the room, shifted orientation. It is no longer pointed at you. And so the instrument tells you, cold, empty, diminishing. The instrument is broken. The temperature is fine. What is actually happening after 40? What is really happening underneath the noise of reduced visibility is consolidation. The energy you used to spend projecting outward, performing, optimizing for other people's assessment begins to settle like sediment finding the bottom of a jar. The clarity that emerges from that settling is not diminishment. It is the most honest picture of yourself you have ever had access to. Most people never get there. They keep said, hake in the jar, keep performing, keep chasing the signal. They die having never seen what's settled at the bottom. You have the option of being still. That stillness is not loss. It is the beginning of accurate self-knowledge. And accurate self-knowledge, the real kind, not the flattering kind, not the therapeutic kind, but the cold, precise, unvarnished kind, is the most dangerous thing a person can possess. Now, let's talk about the people who decided you are no longer worth watching. Not to give you comfort, I'm not in that business. But because examining the judge is, in my experience, considerably more illuminating than accepting the verdict. The people who stopped watching you, the ones who made you feel small, passed over, invisible, what exactly are they doing? Look carefully. They are performing. They are optimizing. They are in the earliest stages of the same race you have already run. They are chasing the signal. They are building the performance. They are shaking the jar. Their judgment of you is not objective assessment. It is projection. The person who looks at someone over 40 and thinks expired is a person who has organized their entire identity around the performance of newness. Their horror of your age is their fear of their own. The urgency with which they dismiss you is the urgency of someone who knows, somewhere below the noise, that they are running toward a wall. Their dismissal of you is not information about you. It is information about them. I once had the particular entertainment of watching a man, a very serious man, deeply invested in the idea that virtue required constant visible effort, go to extraordinary lengths to remain necessary to people who never asked him to, night after night, rain or shine. An entire city's crisis management operation built around one man's inability to consider that perhaps the city would figure it out if he just didn't show up for a week. The lengths he went to be needed. I never found it heroic. I found it the saddest kind of loneliness, the kind that wears a cape. The point is, compulsive visibility is a symptom, not a virtue. The people who need to be in every room, relevant to every conversation, noticed at every turn, they are not confident. They are terrified, and they will exhaust themselves proving something to an audience that is equally terrified and equally performing. You are not in that race anymore. That is not a demotion. That is the most significant upgrade available to a human being. The judgment of people still trapped in the performance is not a verdict on you. It is the sound of their cage. Let me be very specific now, because this is where most people get vague, and vagueness is just another form of avoidance. Being underestimated after 40 produces, concretely, measurably, 4 distinct structural advantages that you do not have access to when you are visible, tracked, and watched. The first is freedom of movement. When no one is watching, you can rebuild without commentary. You can test, fail, pivot, experiment, and none of it gets logged. The person who is constantly visible carries every failure publicly. Every wrong turn is on the record, being assessed, being discussed. You don't have that problem. Your privacy, which you have been treating as a symptom of irrelevance, is actually operational cover. Use it. The second is calibrated judgment. After 40 years of watching people, really watching, not performing, not optimizing, just observing from the position of someone who no longer has an agenda to protect, you have accumulated a quality of read on human behavior that people in their 30s are still building toward. The young and visible see the surface. You see the engine. That is not a consolation prize. That is a precision instrument, and it is available to you right now. The third is lowered opposition. This is the tactical reality of being underestimated, and it is the one people most consistently fail to leverage. When your opponents don't see you as a threat, they don't prepare for you. They save their energy for the visible, the loud, the obviously ambitious. You can move into position without triggering defensive responses. Every strategic endeavor, professional, creative, personal, benefits from being underestimated by the competition. You have that right now for free. The fourth is the compound effect of depth. The things you have learned, lived through, survived, and integrated over 40+ years are not abstract. They are a body of proprietary knowledge that is uniquely yours and cannot be replicated quickly. The young person who outperforms you on metrics of speed and visibility cannot replicate your depth in a year, cannot replicate it in 5. The things inside you, the pattern recognition, the resilience, architecture, the understanding of how things actually work beneath the surface they present are not declining assets. They are appreciating ones. The cage was never locked, but the key is only available to people who've been sitting in it long enough to see that it's actually a vault. There are 2 ways to carry the advantage of being underestimated to being underestimated, and only one of them is worth anything. The first way is to carry it as a wound, to be quietly resentful of the oversight, to build towards some eventual moment of showing them, to let the underestimation fuel a performance of its own. Just a delayed, more elaborate one. This is the person who spends the next decade working toward the validation of the people who dismiss them, who measures their success in the currency of those people's regret, who thinks they'll see me eventually. This is the my. Suze, and I want you to understand why it's a misuse, not because it's ethically wrong. I don't particularly care about that, but because it is strategically catastrophic. The moment you orient your rebuilding around the validation of people who dismissed you, you have handed those people the wheel. You have made their opinion the destination. You are still in the cage. You have simply redecorated it. The second way to carry this advantage is with absolute indifference to whether it is ever acknowledged. Not false indifference. Not performative detachment, the kind that is still very much paying attention to the room and just doing so with a practiced shrug. real indifference. The kind that comes from having genuinely relocated your center of gravity from other people's perception to your own direct experience of what you are. Building and why. This is the own version. The person who is quietly, methodically building something of real substance. Not for vindication, not for visibility, not for the delayed applause of people who wrote him off, but because the work itself is the point, and the clarity of purpose available to them now in this season with this depth is something they wouldn't trade for the noise of being watched. That person is not performing freedom. They have it, and it looks, from the outside, like someone who has simply stopped caring, which is why no one is watching, which is exactly why it works. A knife held in panic is still a knife, but a knife held with intent is surgery. The words you use internally about your own situation are the architecture of what you will build next. And the architecture right now is almost certainly structurally unsound. So let's replace some load-bearing words. When you think overlooked, replace it with untracked. These are not synonyms. Overlooked implies a mistake that should be corrected. It is a passive posture that waits for someone else to look again. Untracked is an operational status. It means you are off the radar. That is a position to leverage, not to lament. When you think irrelevant, replace it with unrestricted. Relevance, in most contexts, means alignment with someone else's current priorities. Irrelevance, then, means freedom from that alignment. You are not being excluded from the game. You have exited a particular version of it that was costing you more than it was returning. Unrestricted is not a consolation. It is the accurate description of your current positioning. When you think peaked, replace it with repositioning. Peaked is a word for performance metrics on a graph. It implies a trajectory defined by external measurement. Repositioning implies agency. You are not at the end of a curve. You are changing the terrain. The previous version of you was optimized for a game that doesn't reward you anymore. Repositioning means you are done playing someone else's game and beginning the design of your own. When you think invisible, replace it with strategic. Invisibility is what you are when you are not seen against your will. Strategic is what you are when you have decided that being seen right now is not the highest use of your position. The language shifts are not affirmations. They are corrections. They are the more accurate words for what is actually happening to you. Install them. Now look around you, not metaphorically. Literally look at the rooms you inhabit, the professional environments, the social structures, the relationships that make up the architecture of your daily life. Some of those rooms were designed to make you feel insufficient. Not maliciously. I'm not suggesting conspiracy, just structurally. The way a ceiling that is 6 inches too low doesn't hate tall people. It was simply built for someone else's high. The office that was designed to reward the most aggressively visible person in the room. The social circle that organizes itself around the performance of youth, ambition, and surface-level achievement. The relationship where your reduced urgency reads as reduced value. The platform, the group, the industry, all built to a specification that no longer matches your dimensions. These environments are not your measure, but they will keep measuring you if you stay in them without adjusting the terms. The audit is simple. For each significant environment in your life, ask one question: does this room require me to shrink to survive in it? If the answer is yes, if the price of membership is the consistent minimization of what you actually are, then the room is not the right container for what you are building. This does not mean immediate exit in every case. Sometimes you stay in a room while building the next one. Sometimes you renegotiate the terms. Sometimes you simply stop asking the room's permission to take up the space you actually occupy. But you need to see the rooms clearly. the ones that were designed for you and the ones that were designed for someone you used to pretend to be. The environments that confirm your underestimation are not neutral. They are active forces. Audit them accordingly. The next time someone dismisses you explicitly or implicitly, you need a response. Not an external response. An internal one. 2 sentences. Here they are. You've stopped tracking something you don't understand yet. That's useful information. Read those again. What they are not: defensive, aggressive, wounded, performatively indifferent. What they are: accurate. Both sentences are factually correct. The person who has underestimated you has genuinely misread something. And that misread is genuinely useful to you. It confirms your operational cover. It tells you as nothing about their perceptual limits, and it costs you nothing. The response protocol is not a mantra you perform for emotional regulation. It is a recalibration every time someone confirms that they are not tracking you. You are receiving a piece of intelligence. File it as such. The accumulation of those confirmations is, in aggregate, a map of where you are free to move without interference. What you do, not do. And I want to be very clear on this, is correct them. The impulse to correct the underestimation, to prove the assessment wrong, to demonstrate your value to someone who has already decided against you, is the most expensive mistake available to you right now. It cost you operational cover. It cost you freedom of movement. It cost you the advantage. Let them be wrong. There is no higher leverage decision. This is not a declaration you make to anyone else. It is not a statement of intent for a room to hear. It is the quiet, internal posture of someone who has made a decision that requires no audience and no validation. The ownership statement is this: I am no longer building for recognition. I am building for result. The audience is optional. The work is not. Sit in that for a moment, not the performance of sitting in it. Actually sit in it. Feel the specific gravity of that sentence. Feel what it would mean to actually mean it. Because here's what happens when you actually mean it. Not perform it, mean it. Everything changes. The thing you've been spending enormous energy on, the performance of relevance, the optimization for other people's attention, the constant low-level anxiety of being watched or not watched, it simply stops. Not because you've suppressed it, because you've outgrown it. Like a coat that no longer fits. You don't fight with the coat. You just notice it doesn't fit, and you stop putting it on. The person who has genuinely arrived at this posture is not arrogant. Arrogance is still performing, just in the opposite direction. The person who has arrived here is quiet, specific, energetically efficient in a way that people who are still in the performance cannot quite put their finger on. They sense something about you has shifted, but they can't name it. That's because the shift is invisible. It's interior. It does not announce itself. It simply produces different results, quietly, steadily, without the noise that once accompanied everything you did. You are not invisible because you peaked. You are invisible because you are finally, completely, irreversibly free. Here's the larger pattern, not the one specific to you, the one specific to the system that produced this problem in the first place. The world runs on a single, almost entirely unexamined premise. That value is visible, and that visibility is a legitimate proxy for value. Its premise is woven into every institution you have ever inhabited. The school that rewarded the student who performed knowledge, not the one who actually had it. The workplace that promoted the person who managed perception, not the one who produced results. The culture that celebrates the young and photogenic, not because they are more interesting, but because they are more interesting. but because they're easier to package. This system was never built for you. I want to say that clearly. Not as a consolation, I'm not offering one, but as a structural fact. Machinery of external validation was built to process a specific type of input. Visible, rapid, replicable, easily measured output from people at the height of their performance bandwidth. You are no longer that input, and the machine doesn't know what to do with you. That is not your problem. It is the machine's limitation. What you actually are right now, not what the machine processes you as, but what you actually are, is a perso. Then, at the exact inflection point where depth exceeds surface, where what is inside has finally, genuinely surpassed what is shown, where the compound interest of 4+ decades of living has reached a value that cannot be captured in a metrics dashboard or a 30-second impression, that kind of value doesn't get processed by the machine. It doesn't get announced. It doesn't trend. It doesn't get a notification, a badge, a standing ovation. It builds. Quietly, specifically, compoundly. And it produces things that the machine is entirely unable to see coming because it stopped looking. You are right now at precisely the right age to do the most important work of your life. Not despite the invisibility, because of it. The pressure is off. The expectations are low. The room has moved on. And you have the rare, specific freedom of someone who has been given back their own time by an audience that couldn't handle the complexity of what they were watching. The audience leaving was not a verdict. It was a permission slip. They handed it to you when they looked away. Take it.